working to connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. Welcome to ASEAN in Focus. We're coming to you live from Manila and Thailand. Hello, Gila.
Hello, Alma. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to all our viewers. I'm Gila Pablo, bringing you the news in the dynamic ASEAN region.
On today's headlines, U.S. President Joe Biden will meet in mid-May with the leaders of Southeast Asian nations with a likely focus on the rising power of China.
Four presidential candidates signed a joint statement on Sunday to join forces if there will be an attempt to destabilize the May 9 elections.
And the Deputy Chairman of Commission of the Indonesian House of Representatives, Abdul Karis, has condemned the Israeli security forces' attack on Palestinian worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem.
And protect the people who are in
Papua New Guinea celebrates World Health Day.
You protect me, for example, if you take a vaccine.
First in our news, U.S. President Joe Biden will meet in mid-May with the leaders of Southeast Asian nations with a likely focus on the rising power of China, the host country announced on Saturday. And this summit, originally scheduled for March, will demonstrate the United States' enduring commitment to ASEAN, according to White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki in a statement referring to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. She said it is a top priority for the Biden-Harris administration to serve as a strong, reliable partner in Southeast Asia. The summit, originally set for March 28 and 29 before being delayed without a new date, will now take place on May 12th and the 13th. The meeting was postponed amid reports that the leaders of some ASEAN members had scheduling conflicts and as the Ukraine crisis continued to deepen. Biden had participated in a virtual summit with ASEAN leaders back in October. And in that summit, Psaki noted in her statement that Biden announced initiatives to expand U.S. engagement with ASEAN on COVID-19, climate change, economic growth, and more. The U.S. statement Saturday did not make clear whether the leaders of the Myanmar would in fact attend. The administration has accused the country's leaders of perpetrating a genocide against the Rohingya minority. ASEAN has sought in vain so far to find a diplomatic solution since the military took power there in a 2021 coup. Now, on March 29, Biden met at the White House with a key ASEAN member, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong of Singapore, and said back then that he wanted to ensure the region remains free and open, a reference to what the U.S. sees as attempts by rising power China to dominate international trade routes. Let's listen in.
I'm looking forward to hosting the ASEAN leaders here in Washington, D.C. for a special summit this spring. We also discussed a wide range of concerns for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. That includes ensuring that all nations in the region, including China, uphold the principles that enable a free and open region.
A tense competition with China has become one of the greatest foreign policy challenges for the U.S., though other issues like the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan and the war in Ukraine have demanded more urgent attention. ASEAN members include Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, and several of them have experienced growing friction with Beijing. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly met with Vietnamese counterpart Bui Tan Son and Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh as part of her Indo-Pacific trip. Take a look.
I'm looking forward to hosting the ASEAN leaders here in Washington, D.C. for a special summit this spring. We also discussed a wide range of concerns.
In its news release, Canada said beyond the Pacific coastline and geographic proximity, Canada and the Indo-Pacific region have shared histories, cultures, and significant people-to-people ties. And we'll be back with more news right after this break.
Mr. Bawal, ang galing mo namang sumayaw. Pwedeng pa-copy ng dance steps mo?
Oo naman, Mr. Pwede.
Mr. Bawal, ang ganda rin ng forma mo. Pwedeng pa-copy ng forma mo?
Oo ba?
Mr. Bawal, pa-copy naman sagot mo.
Yan ang hindi pwede. Ang pagsilip sa sagot ng iba, lalong-lalong na sa butuan. Oy! Bawal yan!
Ayon sa Omnibus Election Code, ang pagtatangkang silipin at alamin ang boto ng iba ay isang election offense.
Mr. Pwede? Please report to the principal's office.
Ako si Mr. Bawal, nagpapaalala sa inyo na ang pagsilip sa boto ng ibang botante. Oy! Bawal yan!
A public service message of Net25 for Mata ng Halalan 2022. Matatag, matapang, matapat.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Ilalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Welcome back to the program. The Philippine Army's artillery units have test-fired for the first time its newly acquired autonomous truck-mounted howitzer system 155mm caliber self-propelled artillery pieces. In a statement sent to reporters Sunday, Army spokesperson Colonel Cerces Trinidad said the live fire exercises were held from April 6 to 8 at the Fort Magsaysay Military Reservation Area in Palayan City, Nueva Ecija. Trinidad said the Atmos 155mm howitzer system is a shoot and scoot weapon that can be rapidly deployed in rugged terrain. I quote, the weapon incorporates an inertial navigation system, based gun laying method, and an automatic loader. End of quote. The Army received 12 Atmos howitzer units in December 2021 from Israeli defense company Elbey Systems. The self-propelled artillery pieces are procured under the Horizon 2 of the revised Armed Forces of the Philippines Modernization Plan. It is worth 2.4 billion Philippine pesos. Meanwhile, 4 presidential candidates signed a joint statement on Sunday to join forces if there will be an attempt to destabilize the May 9 elections. During a joint press conference at the Peninsula Manila Hotel in Makati City, Manila Mayor Francisco Isko Moreno Dumagoso, Senator Panfilo Lacson, and former National Security Advisor Norberto Gonzales said they are worried that there will be massive cheating in the coming polls. They also assured the voters that they will never withdraw from the electoral race despite alleged attempts to lure them to quit and make the ultimate sacrifice. Let's watch this.
At kami, pangalawa, ay magsasanib puwersa upang labanan ang anumang pagtatangka na baluktutin ang totoong pagpapasya ng taong bayan sa pamamagitan ng mga paggalaw na hindi kanais-nais o di kaya maglilimita sa malayang pagpili ng ating mga kababayan.
Dahil para bang meron kaming iisang aming naging karanasan na medyo kami po ay pinapaatras sa aming pagiging kandidato sa pagkapresidente. Kaya po kami ay nagkasundo. Simple lang po naman ang aming pinagkaisahan na nasa aming statement. Wala pong aatras sa amin. Kasi tingin namin po ay isang napakalaking pagkukulang sa ating mga mamamayan kung hindi natin igagalang yung kanilang karapatan na mamili kung sino talaga ang nararapat na mamuno sa atin.
This all came about when Secretary Gonzales visited me sa Manila Hotel. Ito yung after no aming media forum ni Senate President Soto do sa Roma, yung Samahang Plaridel kay Julia Abdasa. So I met with him. Sinabi niya sa akin na nagkausap sila ni former spokesman Abella at saka ni Senator Manny Pacquiao at senior nilang tatlo ang kanilang common experience na meron kumakausap sa kanila, pinag-withdraw, bibigyan ng pera at pinagkakampanya pa at meron pang budget. We had at least 2 meetings already, 2 meetings for that matter. Doon nakita ko yung ano intention The intention was not to unite the so-called opposition, but to unite under one candidate. Unfortunately, yung candidate na yun yung kumakausap sa amin, si Vice President Leni Robredo. Face to face, 2 beses kami nag-usap. Very clear, very obvious, na ang intention is to unite under her. And that's not unification as far as I'm concerned. And that's the reason why we are here. We talked among ourselves to offer ourselves and let the Filipino people decide.
Meanwhile, thousands of students protest in Indonesia against extending the presidential term limit after rumors swirled for weeks about a potential change to the country's constitution. The Southeast Asian country's next election is in 2024, and President Joko Widodo would not be eligible to run as Indonesia places a 2-term limit on its leader. Senior ministers and several political parties last month suggested the election should be delayed and the constitution amended to allow presidents to serve more than 2 terms. Monday saw about 2,000 university students gather in front of the House of Representatives building. Indonesia has seen similar rallies sprout across the country in the last week. The debate on delaying the election and extending the presidential term has gathered steam since March, despite Widodo himself rebuking the suggestions multiple times. But critics said his objection to the proposals came far too late, only fueling the horror. And at least 16 people have been killed and more than a dozen others injured when a truck descending a remote mountain in Indonesia's West Papua province crashed into a cliff.
Para saat ini tiba itu kondisi situasi di sana itu sudah
Local rescue official Mons Brari told Metro TV that when search and rescue teams arrived at the scene 2 hours after they first received the receptors of the crash, they saw some bodies strewn across the road, thrown out of the truck by the force of the impact. A child was among those killed and 13 others were injured and receiving treatment at a local hospital. Some of the injured were in a critical condition. He said the road was particularly dangerous due to its steepness and the absence of proper lighting. Deadly traffic accidents are common in the archipelago nation of 270 million people, where vehicles are often old or poorly maintained and road rules are routinely ignored. In February, 13 people were killed and dozens more injured after a tour bus carrying factory workers to a beach holiday crashed on Indonesia's Java Island, according to police. In March 2021, a bus carrying dozens of passengers plunged into a deep ravine in West Java province, killing 29 people.
Para saat ini tiba itu kondisi situasi di sana itu sudah jenazah sudah mayat semua sudah berhambur di bukan satu titik tapi beberapa titik, dan kita mulai evakuasi dari korban pertama hingga sampai korban yang ke-13, sedangkan yang korban yang 3 diantaranya itu sudah duluan dievakuasi ke rumah sakit Pratama.
We now go to an update on the war in Ukraine. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba, appearing on CBS's Face the Nation, is warning that Russian troops appear to have decided to raze the city of Mariupol to the ground. His comments come hours after a Russian ultimatum for the surrender of the encircled fighters holed up in a fortress-like steelworks in Mariupol expired. Take a look.
The remainings of the Ukrainian army and large group of civilians are basically encircled by the Russian forces. They continue their struggle, but it seems from the way Russian army behaves in Mariupol, they decided to raze the city to the ground at any cost. Intensification of heavy fighting in eastern Ukraine, in Donbass, large-scale offensive of Russia in that part of Ukraine, and also desperate attempts of the Russian forces, as I said, to finish with Mariupol at any cost. These are my expectations.
Знищення наших всіх хлопців в Маріуполі, те, що вони зараз роблять, остаточно може поставити крапку на будь-яких форматах перемовин.
Now, Moscow is pushing for a major victory in the southern city as it works to wrest control of Donbass and forge a land corridor to already annexed Crimea. But Ukraine has pledged to fight on and defend the city. Russia's defense ministry said there were up to 400 mercenaries inside the encircled Azovstal steel plant, calling on Ukrainian forces inside to lay down their arms and surrender in order to save their lives. Moscow claims Kiev has ordered fighters of the nationalist Azov battalion to shoot on the spot anyone wanting to surrender. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said if Russian forces were killed, the remaining troops defending the city it would end the peace talks. Russian President Vladimir Putin has already said the talks are at a dead end. Mariupol has become a symbol of Ukraine's unexpectedly fierce resistance since Russian troops invaded the former Soviet state on February 24. The UN World Food Program says that more than 100,000 civilians there are on the verge of famine and lacking water and heating. Ukrainian officials, meanwhile, said the city was on the verge of a humanitarian catastrophe. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry said that more than 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers have already surrendered in Mariupol, a strategic port city in eastern Ukraine that has been besieged by Moscow's troops for over a month. Let's take a look.
В городе Мариуполь, в районе металлургического комбината имени Ильича, в результате успешных наступательных действий российских вооруженных сил и подразделений милиции Донецкой Народной Республики добровольно сложили оружие и сдались в плен 1026 украинских военнослужащих 36-й бригады морской пехоты, 151 раненому украинскому военнослужащему 36-й бригады морской пехоты. На месте была оказана первичная медицинская помощь, после чего все они были доставлены в городскую больницу Мариуполя для лечения.
Russia is believed to be trying to connect occupied Crimea and Moscow-backed separatist territories Donetsk and Lugansk in Donbass and has laid siege to Mariupol at the start of the military operation. Thousands of civilians are believed to have died in the city, which has seen some of the most intense fighting in this conflict.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky warns that the world should prepare for the possible use of nuclear weapons by Russia, repeating an early warning. Let's watch this.
І не треба чекати від Росії, коли вона буде використовувати ядерну зброю. Світу не треба, світу треба готуватись до цього. Готуватись по-різному, не тільки антидоти, тощо, там, да, бомбосховище, але з ними треба говорити, підписувати бумагу, затиснути їх економіку так, щоб у них не було навіть думки про це. Ось що я маю на увазі. А треба очікувати від них. Вони можуть використовувати будь-яку зброю, я впевнений в цьому, будь-яку зброю. І вірити не можна. Тому і які гарантії безпеки наші.
CIA Director William Burns said Russia's setbacks could lead President Putin to resort to using a tactical or low-yield nuclear weapon to try to regain the initiative. Let's watch this.
But, you know, given the potential desperation of President Putin and the Russian leadership, given the setbacks that they've faced so far militarily, none of us can take lightly the threat posed by a potential resort to tactical nuclear weapons or low-yield nuclear weapons. We don't. While we've seen some rhetorical posturing on the part of the Kremlin about moving to higher nuclear alert levels, so far we haven't seen a lot of practical evidence of the kind of deployment. You know, we're obviously very concerned. I know President Biden is deeply concerned about avoiding a third world war, about avoiding a threshold in which, you know, nuclear conflict becomes possible.
Russia has many tactical nuclear weapons. They are less powerful than the bomb the United States dropped in Hiroshima during World War II. Russian military doctrine features a principle called escalate to de-escalate, which would involve launching at a first strike nuclear weapon of low yield to regain the initiative if things go badly in a conventional conflict with the West. But under this hypothesis, I quote, NATO would intervene militarily on the ground in Ukraine in the course of this conflict. And that's not something, as President Biden has made very clear, that's in the cards, end of quote. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres presented the first detailed policy brief issued by the Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy, and Finance, which he set up to study the effects of the war in Ukraine on the world's most vulnerable. Let's listen to this.
The war is supercharging a three-dimensional crisis: food, energy, and finance, that is pummeling some of the world's most vulnerable people, countries, and economies. And all this comes at a time when developing countries are already struggling with the slate of challenges not of their making: the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and the lack of access to adequate resources to finance the recovery in the context of persistent and growing inequalities. We are now facing a perfect storm that threatens to devastate the economies of many developing countries. The impact of the war is global and systemic. As many as 1.7 billion people, one-third of whom are already living in poverty, are now highly exposed to disruptions in food, energy, and finance systems that are triggering increases in poverty and hunger. 36 countries count on Russia and Ukraine for more than half of their wheat imports, including some of the poorest and most vulnerable countries of the world. And prices were already on the rise, but the war has made a bad situation far worse. Inflation is rising, purchasing power is eroding, growth prospects are shrinking, and development is being stalled, and in some cases, gains are receding. Many developing economies are drowning in debt, with bond yields already on the rise since last September, leading now to increased risk premiums and exchange rate pressures. And this is setting in motion a potential vicious circle of inflation and stagnation, the so-called stagflation. This war must end. The people of Ukraine cannot bear the violence being inflicted on them, and the most vulnerable people around the world cannot become collateral damage in yet another disaster for which they bear no responsibility. We need to silence the guns and accelerate negotiations towards peace now, for the people of Ukraine, for the people of the region, and for the people of the world.
Meanwhile, the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, or UNCTAD, Rebecca Greenspan, also spoke to the journalist, and she urged all countries to keep their food markets open. Let's listen in.
We urge all countries to keep their food markets open and to cease any restrictions that will maintain the international trade and food, in food and fertilizers not flowing to the countries that need them. Hoarding and speculative movements threaten food supplies, and we need solidarity in these times of crisis. We know that gas and fertilizer prices have more than doubled, as the Secretary General already explained. So we urge governments to continue a coordinated approach to make strategic reserves available to the global market. And where possible, we must reduce the use of wheat for biofuels, because we will need wheat for food.
This report gives us, again, the solutions to acting now with the instruments that we have. Otherwise, there will be even more instability. There will be even more crisis as we see it, and that crisis will go beyond borders. Right now, what we're seeing is that the resources are not going towards stemming the tide of this crisis, and that's what we need to see, that it does. We don't see ODA go into military expenditure, but that we see that it's additional if it's to protect lives, and that we need, to keep the ODA, to keep the foreign direct investment, to keep all the tools that we have existing that Rebecca has talked about in play.
On food, beyond keeping markets open and ensuring that food is not subjected to export restrictions, the brief also urges the prompt provision of funds for humanitarian food assistance. Food producers who face higher input and transport costs urgently need support for the next growing season. On energy, it calls on governments to use strategic stockpiles and additional reserves to help to ease this energy crisis in the short term. More importantly, the world needs to accelerate the employment or the deployment of renewable energy, which is not impacted by market fluctuations, to phase out coal and all other fossil fuels. Continues here on ASEAN in Focus. We'll be right back.
Isa pa! Isang malakas na iri na lang! Konti na lang! Isa pa!
Pamilya. Sila ang nagmulat sa atin paano magmahal.
I'm doing this all for you. Kasi mahal na mahal kita.
Mangarap.
Hello po! Patapos na po ako magluto.
Lumaban.
Kilala akong isa sa may mga matigas na ulo sa Anyong Island. Nagkamali ka ng kinalaban.
Bumangon.
Si Mama ay mahal na mahal ka.
Sila ang nagbibigay sa atin ng ngiti, inspirasyon, lakas ng loob, at pag-asa. Handog ng Net25 ang mga natatanging obra na nagpapatunay na ang mahalaga sa lahat ay pamilya. Mi Esperanza. Panalo o talo, it's you. Never twice. Palabra de Amor. Gabi-gabi sa Net25, prime time ng pamilya. Let's get together sa init ng summer.
Welcome back. The Deputy Chairman of Commission of the Indonesian House of Representatives, Abdul Kariz Al-Masyari, has condemned the Israeli Security Forces' attack on Palestinian worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem. Take a look. He said the brutal attack carried out by the Israeli force or Israeli police into the Al-Aqsa Mosque resulted in hundreds of Palestinians, including journalists, medics, and female worshippers, being injured. He also said Israel's cruel actions so far cannot be justified, including the attacks on Palestinians at the mosque. The legislator also condemned Israel's systematic efforts to continue to displace Palestinians by destroying their homes in the West Bank and thousands of other crimes during the occupation of Palestine by Israel. In this regard, he also urged the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to file a protest with the United Nations regarding the Israeli provocation. Violence has spiraled in Israel and the West Bank after a series of attacks inside the Jewish state in recent weeks, prompting raids and clashes in the occupied Palestinian territories. A total of 14 people have been killed in attacks in Israel, most of them by Palestinians since March 22. Some 22 Palestinians have been killed in the same period as well, including assailants in the anti-Israel attacks, according to an AFP tally. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has given Israeli forces a free hand to defeat terror in the West Bank, which Israel has occupied since the 1967 Six-Day War. In other news, Vietnamese police arrested the country's deputy foreign minister for allegedly receiving bribes connected to a repatriation flight program during the pandemic. On Thursday, the Ministry of Public Security issued a statement saying Tuan Dong and two other officials had been arrested as part of an investigation into a bribery scandal connected to repatriation flights for Vietnamese citizens since 2020. Police had searched the residences and workplaces of the three, and after closing its borders to slow the spread of COVID-19, Vietnam organized nearly 800 charter flights to bring citizens home from 60 countries and territories. According to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, reports said travelers faced complicated procedures while paying exorbitant airfares and quarantine fees to get home. Police have arrested 5 other people connected to the case since January. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Lee Tae-chung Hang previously said that those involved in the wrongdoing should be seriously punished under the law. Shanghai reported the first COVID death since the start of its weeks-long lockdown. 3 elderly people with underlying conditions, according to the city government on Monday. The city government also said the disease included 2 women, aged 89 and 91, and a man aged 91. It said they all had a variety of underlying health complaints, such as coronary heart disease, diabetes, and high blood pressure. Shanghai, China's largest city, has chewed under a patchwork of lockdown restrictions this year amid the country's worst COVID outbreak since the start of the pandemic. Desperation as people run out of food and medicine, 25 million people under lockdown and confined to their homes. China has largely slowed new cases to a trickle thanks to a zero-COVID policy of mass testing, travel restrictions, and target lockdowns, but it has also recently struggled to contain outbreaks in multiple regions, largely driven by the fast-spreading Omicron variant.
Manufacturing is also grinding to a halt, with little moving in and out of the largest container port in the world. Analysts say the mounting cost of China's zero-COVID policy threatens to derail Beijing's ambitious GDP target. Concern is also growing that the city lockdowns in China will have massive downstream effects for global supply chains. Let's watch this.
If China's current COVID restrictions remain in place for the next year, nearly half of our companies will reduce investment. So obviously this is still too early to tell, but companies are in a wait and see mode at this point. And if this current lockdown or restrictions continue for extended period of time, I think there will be an impact on investment decisions going forward.
There are many obstacles. First of all, most of the companies based here in Shanghai, they simply had to close down operations, so they cannot manufacture. So they have to ask for a special permission to operate, but usually those permissions are given only to very special companies in essential industries like chemical, food, or pharma. So, and if they can operate, they only can operate in a closed loop, which means the workers have to stay on site. They cannot leave, so they are sleeping there. If you are allowed to operate, the other big challenge is the supply chains, because first of all, it is difficult to get the raw materials. And secondly, it's very difficult to get your goods delivered to the customers because there is a lack of truck drivers. Either they are also in lockdown or they don't have the requested COVID tests plus all the permits you need. It's a kind of logistics black hole, which is caused by all the restrictions for the truck drivers for sure. And they cannot go to the surrounding provinces for cargo pickup. And that makes it very, very difficult. And I'm sure that if this lockdown continues for a couple of weeks or even months, because we do not know how fast the government is able to contain this pandemic, it will have quite an impact on business revenues and profits.
Car makers this week warned of severe disruption to supply chains and possibly even halting production completely if a lockdown in business hub Shanghai continues. Premier Li Keqiang said this week that state support should be stepped up and tools including cuts to the reserve requirement ratio for banks should be tapped to help virus-hit sectors. Other major cities struck by COVID outbreaks include southern tech powerhouse Shenzhen, which went into full lockdown for almost a week in March. The city of Kunshan, an important production center for electronics near Shanghai, is closed down until April 19. Part of Taikang, another manufacturing area in Jiangsu province, is also locked down.
Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly met with her Vietnamese counterpart Bui Tan Son and Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh as part of her Indo-Pacific trip. Take a look.
Yes, indeed. It is my first trip to Asia as foreign minister. It is coming at a time where a lot of things are happening in the world, but at the same time, it is coming at a moment where we're developing our first Indo-Pacific strategy. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we can further our support and relationship as many things are happening.
In its news release, Canada said beyond the Pacific coastline and geographic proximity, Canada and the Indo-Pacific region have shared histories, cultures, and significant people-to-people ties. It also said that Canada is committed to deepening diplomatic, security, trade, and economic engagement in the region to ensure that they are seizing opportunities for Canadians and advancing shared priorities. Before landing in Hanoi, Jolie was in Indonesia, where she kick-started her first trip to Asia as foreign minister. She'll also engage in discussions on pressing global challenges, and that includes the need for a diplomatic solution on the unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine and the efforts of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations to address the ongoing crisis in Myanmar. And throughout her trip, Minister Jolie will stress Canada's commitment to pursuing engagement in the Indo-Pacific region.
In other news beyond the region, in Spain, the health government there has announced that use of face masks will no longer be mandatory indoors from April 20th. Here's Beverly Madrid for the report.
Authorities here have announced that the country will lift the mask requirement on April 20. On April 19, a royal decree will be taken to the Council of Ministers, by virtue of which masks will no longer be mandatory in interior spaces in general. The Spanish Ministry of Interior wrote on its official Twitter account, stating the words of the Minister of Health. Since a large number of persons choose to take a trip outside their country during the holidays, the government has suggested that the requirement gets lifted on April 20 in order to avoid any surge in infection cases. At a press conference held at the Palacio de Fuensalida in Toledo, the Minister of Health of Spain, Carolina Darias, said that face masks will no longer be mandatory when accessing indoor places.
Y siguiendo las medidas que hasta ahora hemos hecho, desde la progresividad, desde la gradualidad y contando con el asesoramiento de las personas expertas, he propuesto al Consejo Interterritorial, he participado, que el próximo Consejo de Ministros del 19 de abril llevaremos un Real Decreto en virtud del cual las mascarillas dejarán de ser obligatorias en los interiores, en los espacios interiores, quedando estos en algunos supuestos en los que nos parece absolutamente imprescindible que sí lo sean. Por tanto, el 19 de abril, el próximo Consejo de Ministros tras la Semana Santa, llevaremos un Real Decreto Ley en virtud del cual las mascarillas dejarán de ser obligatorias en el interior. La ruta sería 19 de abril Consejo de Ministros, 20 de abril publicación en el Boletín Oficial del Estado y entrada en vigor el mismo día de su publicación, es decir, el 20 de abril.
This means that all travelers and citizens of Spain will now be able to enter bars, cafes, restaurants, theaters, museums, shopping centers, and other events without being required to wear a face mask. However, the requirement will continue to remain in place for those working or visiting healthcare facilities. Even though Spain has already lifted the majority of its national COVID-19 restrictions, the country still requires travelers to meet entry rules. Reporting from Barcelona, Spain, I'm Beverly Madrid. We live in interesting times.
In another news, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi says Vietnam is an important pillar in India's foreign policy, especially its Act East policy. Modi said the above statement during his phone conversation with Vietnamese Party General Secretary Nguyen Phu Trong on Friday. Party leader Trong briefed the Indian Prime Minister about Vietnam's socio-economic development targets and foreign policy adopted at the 13th National Party Congress, affirming that Vietnam attaches importance to strengthening the comprehensive strategic partnership with India, both bilaterally and multilaterally. As the two countries mark the 50th founding anniversary of their diplomatic ties, the two leaders expressed their pleasure at the robust and effective advancement of the bilateral ties in recent past. They also valued their bilateral cooperation and mutual support in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. Both sides will continue accelerating cooperation in defense and security, tourism and culture, as well as close coordination at multilateral forums.
Families of detained Myanmar protesters had their hopes dashed after political prisoners were not included in some 1,600 people released by the junta to mark the new year. State television announced that 1,619 prisoners, including 42 foreigners, had been pardoned and will be released to mark the new year, an annual tradition that last year saw 23,000 prisoners freed. A prisoner released from Yangon's insane prison told AFP that political cases and protesters were not among those released, with authorities only freeing criminals. More than 100 people had gathered, hoping to be reunited with their loved ones. The Southeast Asian country has been in turmoil since Aung San Suu Kyi's civilian government was ousted last year in a military coup, which sparked huge protests and a deadly crackdown.
Meanwhile, Cambodia celebrated the Khmer New Year after celebrations were canceled last 2 years due to pandemic. Let's watch this. During the 3-day celebrations, people visit their families in the provinces. National Games. Cambodia reported 15 cases of Omicron variant on Thursday after most of the country's 16 million population fully vaccinated. The World Health Day is a global health awareness celebrated every year on April 7 under the sponsorship of the WHO. Echo Hortaleza tells us how they celebrated the day in Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. Here's Echo Hortaleza Quinola, Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea.
The National Capital District celebrated World Health Day under the theme Our Planet, Our Health. Port Moresby Governor Powes Sparkup and the Active City Development Program and its partners from the World Health Organization and the Department of Health spearheaded the celebration of World Health Day by a morning walk and exercise from Southside Fitness Center to Sir Hubert Murray Stadium. World Health Organization Country Representative Dr. Sevil Husenova speaks about climate change and its effects on one's health.
This year is our planet, our health, which brings up so planetarian issues like climate change, clean air, like clean water, such matters that matters for our health, right? We can also use not a good source of energy like fossil burning or etc. that can pollute our air. Please get vaccinated for COVID-19. Protect yourself, protect your loved ones, and protect the people who are in elder group or more unfortunate positions. You protect me, for example, if you take a vaccine.
Other dignitaries and city officials attended the celebration to raise awareness on focusing global attention on climate actions needed to keep human and the planet healthy. This can also create the society to focus on one's well-being.
If I were to have an influence, if I were to have a purpose in my life, If I were to do this, it's for me to tell you, your health is your wealth.
We also
eat healthy,
active city development
and we've got a lot of
dance
rich
which
food,
is coming up
the
on May
organic,
31st.
our garden food,
This is an event
fresh
that
fish,
you want to know
sort of change our lifestyle.
Come and dance for the
because,
environment and showcase
the
your
statistics
skills for a chance
shows
to
that
win
almost
prizes
60% of
up to 5,000 kina.
the deaths are
Registration
caused by
forms are here at
communicable
Southside Fitness
diseases, which
Center.
lifestyle diseases.
Port Moresby remains dedicated in its purpose of making its citizens proactive, progressive, and healthy. This is Echo Hortaleza Quinola, Eagle News. We live in interesting times.
As the largest city in northern Thailand, Chiang Mai is a must for anyone traveling there. Here's Crystal Mapa to tell us more. Crystal.
Have you ever experienced interacting with elephants? How about visiting theme cafes that will surely gain likes and hearts in your social media feed? We'll take you to Chiang Mai City, Thailand for what really makes it famous for locals and tourists. Just an hour and a half via plane from Bangkok, Chiang Mai City is welcoming its visitors with cool weather. It's in the mountainous northern part of Thailand with picturesque views, elephant sanctuaries, and numerous themed cafes. If you're in for a different kind of adventure, try visiting an elephant sanctuary wherein interaction with these gentle giants is allowed. Riding elephants is strictly prohibited in sanctuaries, for it is actually unethical to do so. Are theme cafes your cup of tea? From minimalistic to futuristic, Chiang Mai City is ready to serve you with Instagrammable cafes. This city is also known for its tasty coffee and tea that will surely capture your taste buds and feel-good smiles. If you're thinking of visiting Thailand soon, why don't you include Chiang Mai City to your itinerary and have that one-of-a-kind experience with elephants, fantastic views, and themed cafes? From Chiang Mai, Thailand, I am Crystal Mapa. We live in interesting times.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you, Gila, for keeping me company today, Monday, here on ASEAN in Focus.
You're very much welcome, Alma. And that's the latest news in the ASEAN region. Thank you for joining us today here in ASEAN in Focus. This is Gila Pablo from your Thailand Bureau, and we live in extraordinary times.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Alma Angeles. We'll see you back tomorrow, same time, same place, and stay in the news. From everyone here on Net 25, thank you for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow.